Welcome back to the PricePlow Podcast. The man needs no introduction. We are supremely honored to have Rich Gaspari here of course, Gaspari Nutrition. Rich, welcome to the show. We have a lot to cover, and so I'd like to just get right into it. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here with you guys from PricePlow. I watch all your stuff, and I'm very impressed how you've been able to evolve, the overall PricePlow itself, as being, authorities in the industry. And that's why, I came back to join with you guys and, want to tell my story about what I'm about. Because as you know, I've been in business almost 3 decades doing Gaspari Nutrition.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for the kind words. Let's just get right into it. If you don't mind, just coming from the top. I'm sure a lot of our listeners kind of know the story, but let's kind of go take the long arc because you've had some different evolutions, and then we will get into all the cool stuff you're doing now, including I'm like your biggest fan of the proven egg right here. So we'll get into that as well. But if you don't mind, just give it to us from the top, starting as a bodybuilder, and maybe even before that if you want.
Well, you know, I was a kid that always wanted to be a pro bodybuilder from the time I was like 10 years old. The first time I got to see Muscle Builder magazines, the Joe Weider Muscle, before it was Muscle Builder, before it was Muscle and Fitness. I had a friend of mine that I was playing, ball with him in his backyard, and then somehow we ended up in his basement. I saw these stacks of magazines, bodybuilding magazines, and there was, I was like 10, 11 years old, and I saw pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Franco Columbu and Frank Zane and Robbie Robinson, and I'm looking at these magazines and I'm looking at these people, and I go, I was always into comic books, seeing all the superheroes, and I'm looking at these guys. Oh, these people are real. They're not they're not superheroes. They're real people, and people get themselves developed like this. So I was so intrigued, and from that point on, I said I want to be a bodybuilder. And it's funny. I used to go to this kid's house and go in this kid. He wanted to go play ball or do whatever, and I'd be in his basement reading magazines, and I would be wanting to take him home, and he would never let me take him home because he said my dad would punish me if he took a magazine. But that was my first encounter of like what bodybuilding was all about. And from that point, believe it or not, I started training when I was like 13, 14. I live in New Jersey, and I was near Rutgers University, and there was a college gym. So I would actually ride my bike to the gym, and I would sneak into the gym where there was all this equipment. I was like 13, 14 years old training
That's
in the
awesome.
gym, and I thought I was a student until they figured out, like, where's your ID? Oh, I forgot it. I would get away with it. After a while, the guy goes, "Where's your ID?" And I'm like, he could tell I was like, much younger, that I shouldn't be in there. He kicked me out. And then I joined this other gym called Health and Strength that was in Highland Park, New Jersey. And I was like this hardcore gym. It was in a basement, this dungy basement. And I just saw this and I just knew this is something I wanted to do. And it's funny, I had no money to join the gym, but I offered my services to go, like, listen, I'll clean the bathrooms, the shower room, I'll make shakes, I'll do all this stuff just to get a free membership. And that's what I did to start training. And that was I got bitten by the iron bug. And from that point, like 14, 15, I started competing, into my teens. I was winning, regional shows in New Jersey. As a teenager, I won a teenage division, which I should have went into the men's division, because the heavyweight that I competed with as a light heavyweight, I beat the heavyweight who went into the men's division and won the overall. So I knew I had something going as a bodybuilder because I was able to get in really good condition. I read a lot with dieting, and I didn't read just magazines. I started reading more, diet books to learn more about nutrition. And as you know, back then there wasn't much in supplementation. I saw things like beef liver tablets that were out there, and choline, isotal, methionine that was out there. There were some proteins, but the proteins, A, they tasted like dirty water. B, they were like WPC 30, which probably, when I took them, they gave you so much gas, you would be farting your head off using the protein. But I still, wanted to use proteins. I did discover by Cybergenics they had an egg protein. And that was actually something that I was using. And I said, wow, this is really good. It doesn't upset my stomach. You know, I started using the egg protein. But yeah, it was I was intrigued, and I did a lot of research, when I was a kid. I was actually a pre-med student in college, and I went to Rutgers, and I knew that nutrition was going to be a big part of, me being successful as a bodybuilder. And I also knew that you can't get all nutrients from foods alone. And this is why I started studying, what are the B vitamins you need? What about vitamin C? What about, so I wanted to learn more and more by knowing that if you had to diet, especially if you were dieting for a show, that you would not get all nutrients from foods alone. So you have to supplement. And I was always a firm believer, even with 16, 17, I was driving my bike to the mall and I would buy all these weeder supplements, to use. And one time it was funny, I brought them all home and I had all these, supplements. My parents were real worried. It's like, what are these drugs? She took all the supplements, brought them to the doctor's office, and said, like, my son's taking all these things. This is dangerous for him to take. And the doctor's like, no, they're just supplements. Don't worry about it. But
Nice.
I always knew like that, and I tell people this because there's a lot of like these avid trainers that don't believe in supplementation and eating properly. And as you know now that the whole food pyramid has totally changed. It's gone the other way, as you know, which we knew as bodybuilders way back to taking higher proteins and things like that. But no, it's just I was always intrigued not only with the training aspect of it, but the nutritional aspect of it and the supplement aspect of it. And as a bodybuilder, I was known to be one of the most ripped bodybuilders of my era and set a standard in the sport. And that a lot had to do with my knowledge in nutrition, and learning that, back then, Arnold just did like a low carb diet with proteins and that was it. He didn't focus on really learning about, what's the percentage of carbs to fats. I followed a Barry Sears diet of 40-40-20, which I thought was very successful overall. And that's the diet I followed. Even today, I follow that diet where I'm taking complex carbs, even with my proteins, but also taking 20% of essential fats. So, overall, like I was intrigued as a bodybuilder, with supplementation when I was training for the Mr. Olympia. And it was fun. Well, actually, before Mr. Olympia, when I was training with Lee Haney, who was my training partner. And I don't know if you know this, we trained together as training partners. I was still amateur. He came in third in the Olympia. I lived with him for 12 weeks. And I pushed him, harder than he ever did. And that year he won the Olympia. I also won the Nationals. And back then you had to win the National and then win Mr. Universe, which I did both. But I kept everything in a log and I was writing everything on. He would call me the professor because I would show him, what I was doing. And here's my diet. Here's the supplements I'm taking. He goes, man, you take this to another level. With how I was, overall, I felt that knowledge is power. And, a lot of muscle heads out there back in the day, you think they're just dumb, but they're not. A lot of us do study nutrition, do study the aspects of, proper training. So, I took it to another level because I was a guy who went to school, went to college. Um, so I felt that if you want to be the best, you got to have no stones unturned. And I mean, I could get into when I basically retired. I started seeing like more and more supplements. I owned a gym and I was saying, what am I going to do? I want to do something. And I was doing personal training in my gym, but I was also giving a lot of people supplements of other brands that I was doing when I was in this gym that I owned. And I thought to myself, why don't I just make my own brand? I know a lot of knowledge that I'd like to have, my, what I believe in and build a brand because back then it was just, and even today, it's really hard to know what to take, and products that are out there. And, so my passion was to educate people, try to make the best product, using ingredients with efficacious doses, and that's basically how I got into this whole supplement business. When I owned this gym, I was personal training. I started selling supplements. I was still competing. I got injured, which I herniated and ruptured a disc in my neck, which totally debilitated me. My right side got paralyzed. I couldn't compete no more. And while lying in bed, I said, what am I going to do for a living? I'm no longer a bodybuilder. And I just started calling manufacturers and I said, I'm going to start my own brand. And I just did it just like that.
I remember really early on, for some reason, this one video of you really always stuck with me. It was you were cooking artichoke pasta because it was gluten free. You were explaining a lot about how you were into gluten free pastas at the time. And I always felt like you were the earliest bodybuilder that I remember being what we call now science based. Like you really could substantiate the things that you were saying, as opposed, not against anyone, but Arnold was very bro with the way he spoke about diet and stuff. Did you feel like the people around you in that generation just didn't have a good science base compared to you?
They didn't have a science base. Like I sat there and they got all their information either from people in the gym or from reading bodybuilding magazines. But I wanted to take it a step further and say, let me listen to nutritionists and what they're saying. And, I found out, like you said, about artichoke pasta and, and cutting out, wheat products because of gluten. And, I read research that it can, not everyone is allergic to gluten, but even slight allergies can cause water retention. And I actually experimented with my body where I would eat, like I told you, a 40-40-20 diet. I would eat breads and pasta as my carbs and with the proteins. And then I would see the result of what my body looked like. And then I would change to like sweet potatoes and rice, gluten free, to see the difference. And I would record how I looked. Was I more cut? Was I holding water? Because a carb is not a carb, as you know. It could be a sugar that's going to raise insulin levels, or it could be a complex carb. But is it a good complex carb? It is a processed complex carb. So I looked into all those aspects of eating to try to look the best that I could and get my body the results that it did coming in, with lower body fat than anyone of my era to ever do.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. I went to Rutgers as well for dietetics, and it's kind of fun because like in nutrition, especially like in our generation, a lot of people like to act like all carbs are just carbs and all calories are just calories. But maybe for normal people there might be a bit of more wiggle room, but when it comes to bodybuilders and it comes to like water retention and like the body composition that you're aiming for, there is a lot more intention when it comes to selecting calories and energy sources. So it's more exciting in my opinion to work with athletes because there's way more of an intention when it comes to details and what can happen as opposed to someone who's just maybe looking to lose 5 pounds.
Really, like I said, I wanted to be the best. And, I was competing against the elite of the elite. A lot of guys were genetically more superior, supposedly, than me, and said, what am I going to do to be better than these guys? And a lot of them were just, like you said, following bro science. They said, well, this is what I do, and this is what this guy does, and this is what Arnold did, so I'm going to follow that. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. And everybody is different, in how they, utilize their nutrients, how they utilize their complex carbs, proteins, fats. And you have to find out what works best for you. And I always tell this to, people today, there's not one set diet for anyone to use because everybody is different. If you came from the cold regions of Nordic, countries, they were eating mostly proteins, as you know, and fishes. And like if you look at someone from Alaska, an Eskimo can live on whale blubber and and fish and eat almost no carbohydrates and go into glucogenesis because they didn't really need carbohydrates. And then you have people living more in the southern areas of the world that use wheat products and potatoes and things like that that their body genetically is used to using. So I looked into all those different aspects of nutrition to say, I'm Italian. So what do Italians? Italians eat a lot of pasta.
I was going to make that joke.
Do.
You're killing me because you couldn't. Yeah,
So,
a lot of us do see the pasta message. Yeah, sorry for interrupting.
so I was like, well, if Italians eat pasta, should I eat pasta? And, I got to tell you, there is a big difference between pasta made in Italy and pasta that's made here in the States. They enrich the
Mm-hmm.
pasta
Mm-hmm.
here. You go to Italy and you eat that pasta, you don't get fat from that pasta, which is a which is a wholly different story when you talk about foods. And we're talking about today how, the whole FDA is going to change that, on, taking away the, food dyes and taking away, what they did to dieting overall, which, like I said, they've turned over the pyramid and just put it the other way, and that's now the new way to eat. Um, but yeah, it's like I knew that I needed to take a scientific approach to what I did, and that's why I always had an interest, and it just kind of parlayed into supplementation because I said it was kind of like it was the beginning stages when I got into seeing what was out there. And little by little, creatine came about. I said, what's this thing? What's this creatine? And that was a big deal because that was the first time that, before it had all the extensive studies on what it did, you knew when you used it, you got fuller, you were able to train stronger. And, I did, I read a lot. I saw stuff like Bill Phillips coming up with HMB back way then. And today now you see HMBs be used more extensive, even more so, or the BCAAs or the, using glutamine and all these supplements that you can get from foods alone. But if you're an elite athlete, supplements will definitely help you perform better, get leaner, be able to get stronger, have more energy. And that's the reason I got into the supplement business.
I love it. Yeah, one thing you said way early on is that, especially when you're dieting down, it's tougher to get the nutrients. A lot of people say, "Oh, you don't need supplements." Well, if you're in constant bulking mode, maybe that's true. But especially for bodybuilders dieting down, you're going to be depleting at least a few things, and it makes total sense. So, what were some of the early products that you used? Because I know the first one I was introduced to and basically changed the trajectory of my life almost. But I'd like to talk about, your first early products that you came out with.
The first early products I came up with was I wanted to come up with a protein powder. I knew protein was really important. It was funny because then it was, now the whole thing that's going on with protein and the shortages of protein, and it's evolved so much that I think whey protein is selling more than cheese because the reason whey came about because it was the byproduct of making cheese. Now it seems like whey has surpassed the cheese. But I made a protein. Back then, I was trying to find a good quality protein, and then whey just came about, so I made a whey protein product. I did make creatine, and I discovered creatine. And it's funny, I could tell you a story about when I first started my business, and it wasn't GMP regulated like it is today. But what I did is I tried to sell a high quality creatine at an inexpensive price. So I was trying to compete with all these companies because creatine just came about. So what did I do? I bought bulk creatine. I bought bulk creatine monohydrate. I bought all the bottles. I bought all the lids and tops, and I set up an assembly line in my basement. So I had this big pile of white powder, and I was trying to do this because I actually was selling it at a really comparable price, and I was getting thousands of bottles out there. I said, man, this is taking me too long to do this myself. So I went throughout the neighborhood and I picked up like 6 kids. So I brought them in my house. I said, I'm going to pay you. And what they did is I set up an assembly line where, I had a scale, you had the creatine there in a pile, a scale, the bottle, the lid, the hair dryer to put the shrink wrap. So I had these kids make this whole assembly line of product that was like over 20 some years ago. And I produced my first batches of 3, 4, 5,000 bottles of creatine. I started selling creatine that way. And I was able to, like I said, grow my business. When I first started, people looked at me as like, this was Rich Gaspari, the bodybuilder. And I went to the Arnold Classic and I set up a 10 by 10 booth. It was just me by myself. And I was there selling my products. And it was funny. People were like, man, they felt sorry for me because look, Rich was this pro bodybuilder. Now he's sitting here by himself, selling his product line, but I looked further into it and I said, you know what, just like in bodybuilding, you got to start from the bottom. And if you're doing this, you got to start from the bottom and slowly grow myself. And I started with very little money. I sold my house. I had about $70,000 to my name, and I was able to turn it into millions of dollars, with the brand because I believed in my passion. And I tell people, if you have a passion for something, you're going to be able to be successful. And that's kind of what I did. I mean, as you know, there was other products that came about what product were the one that you're talking about that you used?
Okay. So I was going to say there's a good chance. So the first pre-workout I'd ever taken was Cytosport Fast Twitch, but that was nothing compared to the OG SuperPump 250. I can honestly say that PricePlow probably wouldn't be here if it weren't for SuperPump 250. So thank you. Because man, pre-workout. I feel bad for the kids who just have never had to experience something like that. That thing just got you jacked up on all fronts, and it tasted incredible. It was absolutely insane. So Super Pump 250 was my entrance into the world of Gaspari Nutrition, and I've been a fan ever since. So thank you for that one.
Oh, no, and that was one of the categories. It was funny because I would look for categories to get into. And back then it was like, people are tired when they get to the gym, and what can I use to, so I put in creatine, I put in BCAAs. So you want recovery, you want explosive training. Of course, then I said, well, we need to put some stimulants. So I put some caffeine, tyrosine. So I just developed it to say I need something that's going to give me better mental focus, energy, muscle recuperation, repair. And back then they didn't have citrulline. We used arginine, for blood flow. And that was the beginning of SuperPump 250. We had 250 milligrams of caffeine. That's why I called it SuperPump 250. But you're right. I came up with it. It was just a big hit. It came at the same time as another product, as you know, Eno Explode. So they came out with the red cans. I came out with the blue cans.
Yep.
And that thing just exploded where it was blue against red. And it was funny. I was very competitive with BC. I was competitive as a bodybuilder. So when I was getting this thing and I was growing the company, I was very competitive where I go into a store and I see a red wall. And I said, I'm going to buy your wall out. So I'm going to put in all blue cans in a Super Pump. The guy hated me because I would go into these stores, buy out the red, replace it with blue, and I would say, blue waves knock down walls. So it'd be, blue waves knock down walls. So blue knocking down red, and I would just be going to places all over the country where you'd have chains of stores, and I would go in there and say, I'll give you a deal. I'll buy out all the product and put Gaspari in there. And this is what I was doing to take over. And the owner of BSN hated me because I was doing stuff like that. To just win over sales. We're good friends now. It's funny because we're good friends now, but it was like at that time, it was like war. But I really respected my competitors because it's like, I'm going to do everything in my power. The whole mental attitude of being competitive in bodybuilding, I parlayed that into being a businessman.
That's perfect. Yeah, another thing I like a lot is that you mentioned, you're taking a more science-based approach, and that's kind of part of the PricePlow Genesis story too. Is back in the day in the bodybuilding.com forums and everything, you saw people looking for information, you saw them asking for studies, but then you look at the tub of a product, and it's like the consumers are being talked down to, and no one was respecting it. It was like there was a disconnect here because this wave of bodybuilders coming up in the 2000s really, really wanted to start looking at the science and everything, and they weren't really getting it. And so brands like yours and educational content like what you put out there and what bodybuilding.com and those sites put out there was a really important. And that's why we started making content as well, because someone's got to explain this stuff. And at the time, they weren't doing well enough. So that's one thing that I appreciate that you've done for sure.
I mean, we've actually done studies with Baylor University, for Sizon, the effectiveness of what it did to help gain muscle. We had a product that really hit big was Novadex XT, which was a natural test booster. Unfortunately, got taken off the market at the time because they say it wasn't DSHEA compliant because it actually came from the outer casings of intestinal tract. But the FDA didn't feel that otherwise. But that was one of my best-selling products that we actually conducted studies to show how it increased natural testosterone better than any product out there. So I love the science, like you said, to be able to conduct studies. Super Pump, I'd have before and afters of showing the pump of before. I don't know if you remember the pictures of the before and afters of using Super Pump. Mm-hmm. They were all done because I wanted to base it off like I said, I was into the supplements and I was like, what is better out there? What should I take? Why should I take it? And that's kind of my thought process when I came up with this brand is like, I'm going to treat this like I wanted to know about this product, like I said, as an athlete. And when I started Gaspari, it was more about making the best products for myself as an athlete.
For me, it was I I'm sorry, the carb and intra-workout that you had, Saison, there were a lot of like calorie-driven products at the time, like mass gainers and intra-workouts that had just like really crappy carbohydrates in them. And I always felt like Saison was really great for my stomach. You know, a lot of carbs at the time just would run straight through me, kind of like the proteins. And maybe this is your history in bodybuilding. I know that you cared about gut health, but like all your products sat well in my gut. I know there were some people that complained about pre-workouts at large at the time and how they ran through them, but you know, I was able to take your Saison really well and not have problems with it. I was a hard gainer at the time, so I needed carbohydrates during my workouts. And then all the way up to, I know I might be skipping a little bit time-wise, but Myofusion had a focus on gut health as well. And so it to me, it felt like your products were not just efficacious, but they also were ahead of their time in terms of like gut health and being able to absorb it.
That's a really good point, because it was Myofusion probiotic that it kind of went viral in the community, and that was early. No one was talking about probiotics at all, especially not in this world.
Yeah, and I found, like you said, it's like you could take all the nutrients that you could take in, but if you're not utilizing those nutrients, what's the use of them? And probiotics are key. And I still tout, and push probiotics. I have, Proven Gut that we sell, that has, digestive enzymes, probiotics, prebiotics, my proven fiber. Fiber is key too. Like, people are really not taking in enough fiber in their diet, probiotics in their diet. I firmly believe in probiotics. They've helped my gut so much. I have an hiatal hernia, and it's all from squatting. So I have acid reflux that comes up, and I was taking medications for it. And I started doing the probiotics, and I started using that. And I don't have to use the medication anymore because of the probiotics helping my gut health. So awesome. You're right. I do firmly believe in not only making, the nutrients, but making sure your body's utilizing those nutrients. And it's still to this day, as we're seeing, probiotics are essential in people's diets. They don't get all the probiotics because whatever reason, if they take, any kind of drugs, to take that, to take away those probiotics, those bacterias, antibiotics, for example, you're not going to have the probiotics in your gut, and you never replace those things. So yes, probiotic in the protein was very important. We came up with carbohydrates, glycofused cluster dextrins. I introduced that into the United States before anybody was using that. Before that was waxy maize. I saw the studies by Mitsubishi on that ingredient. I said, this one's way better than anything we're coming out with, So I brought it to the market. It took time for people to see it. Now, how many people are using cluster dextrins? It's one of the main carbohydrates that are used. But I love the research, and I love the studies, and it's till this day, I still love like looking at the science. And this is the revitalization of the company that I will work on bringing in new products to the market that I believe in.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get into that. I want to go back a little bit more. There was a certain, I think it was a fat burner ad that was kind of famous. Do you have any comments on that at all, or should we skip?
Fat burner or the test booster?
What was the test booster? Was that the blister pack box?
It was Halodrol.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Halodrol was a big one. Yeah.
The most coveted, you mean the most coveted box in the industry?
Yeah. If I can find an image of that, I don't know if we'll get banned off of it.
There's a girl with her legs spread open with the box in the middle of her legs. And, back then you could do ads like that.
Yeah.
And that ad was probably one of the biggest hits because, this hot girl standing there with her legs open with a box saying the most coveted box in the industry.
Man, that must have been fun.
You got to come up with ideas and thinking like what you can do to get people intrigued about what is this box? There's a hot girl. What do they mean by that box? It was stuff like that where you were over the edge. And that's the fun part of this industry. That's the fun part, and what you can do when it comes to the marketing aspect of putting out products. It's a little harder today. I don't even think you can put an ad like that. You get in trouble. Yeah,
you would get like just burnt at the stake if you did that these days. I don't know.
I'm using women, or it's funny. It's not even about a hot woman. They're going to say like you are discriminating against fat women because they can't look like that. So I'm discriminating against a fat woman instead.
What's funny is I thought it was a fat burner ad. That's how much my brain was warped. It was actually a test booster ad. So that's incredible. When you guys were, it must have been some fun times. So let's put it that way. Yeah. So, but of course, it wasn't always fun times though. I mean, there were some down times. There was a bankruptcy involved. Is that anything that you care to share about? Like there was a very high.
Listen, I'm an entrepreneur. I like to share like my experiences. Like I said, I did go through a bankruptcy, which was one of the most horrible experiences that I could go through. And through anybody that goes through a business bankruptcy, it's a horrible experience because you're losing your entire company. You're not losing your company. What happens is if you have the responsibility to your creditors to pay your debt. And if you can't do that, what could happen in business is you can go bankrupt. And I got to a situation and a lot of things happened. I had several lawsuits. I was going through a divorce and I had issues with employees. And I think it was just the total culmination of things happening to me between several lawsuits with employees, divorce, that I lost focus and I kept my eye off the ball. By doing that, I slowly lost, my business. And I remember to the day where I was in an office and I was talking to the bankruptcy attorney, and they go, and I had at one point, my company's evaluation was like almost 100 million. And then I was looking at this and I was going to lose, my entire business. And he says, a lot of guys in your situation kill themselves. And I'm like, I would never kill myself. I mean, you can always come back. And, he says, you have a really good attitude. You can come back from something so devastating as that. And a lot of people, they can't come back from that. Mentally, it's just so overwhelming that it gets to a point that you don't have the ability to focus again. But what I did is, through the bankruptcy, I ended up going in partners with one of my customers, actually. They were buying products from England. And they ended up coming in through the, to the bankruptcy where they paid off the debt and they partnered with me. But I had to put my own money back in just to get 35% of my business that I put in, say $3 million to just become to become a minority shareholder in my company. And I said, well, I'm going to start from here and I'm just going to build myself back up. And awesome. I went through other partners that I had to deal with. Some of them, I don't know if you want to mention them, there was Jared Wheat that you guys all know about, that I was my partner, that I separated from him. And then I got into another partnership and now I'm in total control of the company. And it's one of the reasons why I called you guys, because I said, you know what, I was handcuffed to my partners, to what they wanted and what they believed in. And I said, I have a passion. I like you guys because you guys have a passion to educate people and you've gone beyond that step. So I said, I got to call you guys. I get back with PricePlow, to talk about my story and that we're going to continually come up, with new products. Like you said, you're using my egg protein. And it's funny how that came about. It's like 5 years ago. I'm looking at it and I said, why is anyone selling egg protein? When I told you at the beginning, egg protein was the first protein I used. And to me, it was a high quality protein because the whey protein upset my stomach. And people just stopped using it because it was easier to source whey. Now that's become, not a fact. Egg has become hard. Egg is a choice. It's still difficult, mind you, because there are issues with egg for the fact that there's bird flu. The sourcing of egg is still difficult. I'm now sourcing it from around the world instead of just United States, because we had an egg shortage in the United States, as you know, to keep that product in stock consistently. And I still believe in it to this day that it's a better, higher protein efficiency ratio. It's lactose free. Unless you have an egg allergy, it's probably one of the better proteins to use. So, from there, I don't know where I'm losing myself, where I got from here. But
no, yeah, you're doing great, because what I notice a lot of people don't realize is how ahead of the curve you've been on so many things, like SuperPump 250, probiotics, when no one was talking about probiotics. Like it's a recurring trend that I like to bring up when we have a pioneering guest on our show, because it's worth calling out, because these are the people that were doing things out of the curve before. So like, what are they doing now? Where are we going now? And so I think the egg protein thing, you might not even have realized, you just wanted to solve a problem, but you saw the problem before other people were seeing the problem. Like, you know, for one reason or another, we might want to get away from whey. Maybe the lactose issue. Maybe this market's about to get turned upside down. Like it's a good idea to have a different product out there. And so with Proven Egg, you were early to that, and now you have people searching for egg protein, and you're like all over Amazon, for instance. So like you've solidified that.
Well, you know, it's funny. What made me discover egg is I started seeing vegan proteins coming about, you know, pea protein, brown rice protein. And why were these coming out? Because people have lactose intolerance and they wanted another source of protein. I'm saying, but they're vegan proteins are not complete. They're gritty to the taste. And I said, you saw this growth of vegan protein. It's not because people were becoming vegans, it's because they wanted an alternate source. I said, so what about egg protein? When I came up with this, it's like about 5 years ago, there was nobody who really had egg protein. There's a couple companies. Now Food still has it. There was J-Rob who has it. And I'm looking at it, like, it's not in the bodybuilding market. There was 5% that had egg crystals. Right. And I bought the product and it smelled. And I'm like, why does this protein smell, bad? Let's smell like, like eggs do, when they go bad. Right. Mm-hmm. I said, I wanted to have something clean, that you could smell, and it smells like whatever the product that you're making. And that's what I did. And it's like when I first came out, they said I was stupid, that it's not going to sell. It's going to do bad. And little by little, I started getting into people's hands, and they're like, wow. Like, I changed the label where I said, each scoop is 7 egg whites. So people look at it and said, shit, I'm eating 7 egg whites just with 1 scoop. This is pretty cool. It has a higher protein efficiency ratio. I called out things of what it did. And slowly, like you said, I became number 1 on Amazon, against big players like Now Foods that were number 1. So, we have 7 flavors overall in the egg protein. And I didn't have to reinvent anything. It was around. It's just, I brought it back to life. And just, now we're still selling it. And because of the issues happening right now, as we know, Starbucks is buying all the whey protein. So, people are having difficulties, and isolate now has gone through, it keeps going up every time because I still sell isolate. I still sell concentrate. And, isolate or concentrate went from $10 a pound to, it went up to $14 a pound. And that all happened within a couple of weeks. And I'm like, holy crap, this protein just keeps going up. So I've discovered other sources of egg from other countries that they have plentiful, for some reason, are cheaper than America's egg, still the same quality. And now I'm sourcing that to bring it into the country. I'm getting calls from Costco. I'm getting calls from, Walmart to have some alternate source. So, but I just want to make sure I have the material. So before I get into those stores, because it could be a whole other level. You have one bite at the apple, as a business person, and I need to know that I have to make sure that supply chain is ready for a huge increase in overall sales.
Yeah, if you're doing something at Costco, you got to come ready. Yeah, I just want to make sure the listeners don't know and you mentioned it's an egg white protein. You sometimes say egg, yes. But yeah, that's what a lot of the people love and everything. Out of the 7 flavors, I'm holding Richie's peanut butter cup, which I love. I think. What is your favorite flavor that you are generally like going back to?
I like the salted caramel. To me, I'm not a big chocolate guy, but when I first came out with it, there was brands that made vanilla. And I don't know if you know this, egg has a salt note to it. So If you try to make vanilla with a salty taste, it doesn't taste good. So I'm like, what can I make this that's as close to as a vanilla as I can? And I came up with salted caramel. And that's the flavor we came up with as the replacement for vanilla. But anything that's got like chocolate can have a little bit of a salt note. It does taste good. Chocolate peanut butter, of course, has a salt note because of the peanut butter. We are coming up with cookies and cream. So, there's a lot of flavors you could come up with the egg protein, but every time I come up with something, I make sure that it's going to taste good because, I have a banana nut bread. Of course, bread, banana nut bread has a little bit of salt note. It's not just banana flavor. So you're going to get that salt note to make it taste good. But I care because I know that you can have something, here's another thing, what you said before is your product tasted good. When I got into this industry, before me, products tasted terrible. A lot of products were like you have to hold your nose to take them down. And it was important to me to say, product has to taste good for people to want to take it every day. I mean, you can have the elite hardcore that will hold their nose. I mean, I used to grind up desiccated liver and drink it, because that was like something I did. But that was because I was crazy and I would do that, even though it tasted horrible, I would do it. But to get the masses to try to drink something or take something, it's got to taste good for you to use it day after day after day. It's like when I came up with Myofusion, we talked about proteins. When I first came up with it, I was remember Europa's like, you're never going to be able to, get into the protein market because Optimum has taken that market. And back then, I don't know if you remember, the protein was just watery. It was
Yeah.
sweet, but it was like I looked at it like dirty water. I'm like, this thing doesn't have a good mouthfeel. Why does it have a good mouthfeel? And that was funny. I was drinking coffee and I was adding Cremora, the powder in my coffee, and I'm like, what if we had something that's similar to like Cremora in the protein so that you can get a better mouthfeel? Of course, making it more natural with ingredients that are natural. And I told the company who's making it, can you give me something that's similar to like that Cremora feel, so that when you drink it, you get that nice milky mouthfeel in your mouth. I don't want to use gums because gums just feel like you know, Metarex had like a gum in it, so when you drink it, it's just so thick and it bloats you. So we're able to make that mouthfeel, which I thought was just as important as just the flavoring and the sweetness. And that's when Myofusion took off.
Yeah, there's a few different versions of Myofusion. There's that probiotic one, the Myofusion Advanced. I still think about this. I'm looking at it on our site right now. It was 2014, this chocolate flavor. I still think about this review. I have an old YouTube review from 2014, over like 11 years now. And this chocolate flavor was just like, it was literally mind blowing. You had taken my perception of what whey protein could be. Like you said, double rich chocolate from Optimum Nutrition, bestseller for many, many, many years, but it was watery. You either use way less water, or you started looking for alternatives. You knew you could always go back to that. But when Myofusion Advanced came out, I said, oh, this is like a whole different game now. Like, you really leveled up everything.
And I feel because of the things I did in the industry, like flavor, the flavor systems or mouthfeel, other companies followed suit. And, some of the mistakes I made is not selling that flavor system and going into this vegan protein, which was a big mistake. The one thing I want to tell people is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I listened to advice from employees, and then what happened is what's the brand that's brand that the guys from bodybuilding.com started. They're not, I don't even know if they're around anymore.
There's like they had their own signature series, and there was like
no. It was one of the
like
brothers went on his own.
like RSP. Like they had a bunch of sub brands. I don't know if they started anything. Maybe Ben knows.
No, that's not the brand. It was the brand that Arnold went into.
Muscle Farm.
Muscle Farm. Muscle Farm took my exact Myofusion, copied it to a T, and that's what their protein was. It was just Myofusion in their name, and that made them take off. And I basically handed that over to them like an idiot.
Oh,
So
I see.
that's what made me lose that was one of the mistakes that I made in business that I would never, make again. It's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, sadly, there was a lot of amino acid spiking with accusations and allegations with regards to Muscle Farm. At least later on, like with the Arnold series and everything. So that we covered a lot of that, and that was those were rough times in the industry for sure. Because like at that point, we had better manufacturing, the GMPs were there, things were in place. But the protein, that was like the first wave of protein prices going up, and the reaction was not as good as the reaction that we're seeing these last few years here. So it was kind of a bit of a stain on the industry, but at the same time, like something that we had to go through to really sort out the winners from losers and like clean up the industry and get organizations understanding like how to really test this stuff. So, what other products are you proud of right now? Like, so I think Proven Egg, if I go through it, Proven Egg is probably the first proven, but you have a lot of different things that are proven now. And one of them, I
wanted to get more into the health aspect of it. I mean, we have proven fiber, we have proven gut. I have omega-3, with high EPA and DHA, and enteric coating. I believe in fish oils, high quality, not just garbage. What else is in a proven line?
Well, I was going to bring up
Proven
you've
EA.
recently launched proven creatine for women, which I think is
Oh,
interesting
so I
because
had creatine for women, which is a combination of creatine with collagen and BCAA. So we launched that. Another product we just launched was creatine with HMB. Um, it's I see a lot of people now using creatine with HMB. So we felt that it was necessary, and I'm using it now all the time. I use it after my training. Um, what else we can? I'm coming up right now with an NMN product.
sweet.
We're adding in TMG, B vitamins, and as you know, NMN converts to NAD plus. It just got it used to be considered a drug, and now it's back to being a supplement. So we are launching in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to get you guys to be the first to see this product and try it out. But I worked diligently on making sure that it's not just NMN, but it has other ingredients to help for the conversion to NAD plus. And I believe in NAD plus because I use it myself. I feel great overall with energy, and it's not just for old guys like myself. I mean, any elite athlete would want to take in, an NAD plus to help them perform and, and train better.
Yeah, Marty, interesting because you're adding the TMG or betaine, and so that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you're not seeing
Chelation.
enough good multi formulas like that. So yeah, definitely excited to get that. While you're at it, I mean, can you take us through your current regimen, your maybe your routine and your regimen? Like, what else are you taking, and how are you training? Obviously, you're not like training as hard, I'm guessing, as you were when you were 20 years old. But
I still, if you
yeah,
watch my videos, I still train hard, believe it or
yeah, you
not.
do.
And I still kill people in the gym. I went through a leg workout with one of the Olympia classic bodybuilders, Brian, and I had him throw up. And that's how hard I still train on
Oh, so
my
you are still
legs
throwing up.
training.
Okay.
Yeah, I do a lot of eccentric training now. So my reps are really slow on the eccentric and explode them on the positive. So I control the weights a lot more. But for some reason, my bottom half is just super strong. I told you I ruptured a disc in my neck, and that caused my strength in my upper body not as strong as my legs. I had surgery about 3 years ago where I had a disc replacement in my neck itself, and I'm still trying to rehab my right side to come back. So I still, like I said, I train 5 days a week. I get up 5 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym like 6 o'clock, get my workout. I start my day like 8 o'clock, overall as the guy running this business and everything from, marketing to operations, production. I do a lot and I'm slowly building up my team to grow the company because my goal is to get this company back to a $100 million company. And I know people say it's impossible. You had your day. And I believe I don't. I think I have a lot of experience. I have the experience of hard knocks that a lot of owners don't have. And I see the mistakes that a lot of other supplement owners are doing. And I feel, I respect all the other companies out there and what they've been able to do and how they do it. And I actually take note of some of the things that they're doing good to say, like, I could use what they're doing, to help me, build my company. But I'm overall, I'm living this every day. My supplement regimen, I still use Sizon. I think that's one of the best supplements. I use intra workout. I still use Super Pump. I use Super Pump Aggression. The Super Pump Aggression it's more for nootropics, you know, um, it's more for mental focus. It has more stim in it. Um, I do use essential amino acids. So I do have, my proven EA I take before training. Um, I take glutamine, about 3 times a day. I take creatine HB after my training. Now they're showing research to take creatine after training. So I've been using it after training. I use my egg protein. At least I take about 100 grams of protein. My protein intake's around 100, 300 grams a day. I still take in, and I keep my body fat fairly low,
So
because
you're
I keep
still
my carb intake around 300,
mhm.
maybe a little more carbs, but mostly it's 40 40 20 that I follow overall in my diet. What other supplements I use? I do use my NMN product that I have right now, and I feel great on it. Um, of course, vitamin D and K. I had an issue with I had to put a stent a couple of years ago, and the whole effect of having that because of calcium, calcification in your arteries. I'm a big advocate of vitamin D and vitamin K. Um, What else do I take? I want to get into other products that I want to add into the in line, but I'm looking to. I don't know if you saw, I had a brand called Ageless, but I kind of put it on hold, and I want to bring that brand back up under Gaspari. But I'm looking at like nanokinase, for better blood flow. But I'm looking at a lot of different supplements out there. I always take, what else do I take? I take a lot of stuff. Fiber. I use the
Yeah.
fiber 2 to 3 times a
Fiber.
day as well. I think that's really important. My antivitis, always take my antivite, with the essential vitamins, chelated minerals, beta alanine, carnitine, and I take my Cytolene PM to help me sleep at night. So even though I sell all these products, I do use all my products.
Hmm.
Any product that I come up with, I make sure that I use it myself and I use it for a certain period of time to see how I feel. Like I'm excited to get you guys the NMN products so that you can definitely try it and I feel great on it right now.
You
Yeah.
mentioned, or if I could say, Anavite was the first pre-workout that I remember ever having beta alanine in it back in the day. It still has beta alanine in it as well. That was kind of
Yes.
a different move where it became a daily intake product, whereas most companies were just putting it pre-workout, which isn't really where the data supports. Although it's convenient for people to have the itches in the gym, to get it in
Yes.
daily is really where the benefits are.
The benefits of lowering lactic acid, is taking, when you look at the studies, it's, 3.2 grams of beta alanine taken every day, not just on training days. So that's why I put it in my multivitamin. And it's been ever since one of my top selling. That is believe it or not, that's my number one selling product is Anavite. I still sell hundreds of thousands of bottles of Anavite. We do have the Anavite multi-pack, which we made, which has our omega-3, CLA, proven liver detox, along with proven gut. So that's another product that we sell in our mega packs, multi packs. I'm looking to make some other multi packs to take away the confusion and actually make something even a little bit more cost effective by adding it into like a multi pack, whether it's a fat burning multi pack or whether it's a hormone multi pack for test boosting. I mean, we're looking into all different products to add to the line moving
I love
forward.
it. Yeah. What I like a lot is that you're staying true to your sports nutrition roots and bodybuilding roots, but as we're all aging, you're getting into, I think, appropriate longevity / anti-aging type things like the NMN. Like fiber, obviously fiber is not an anti-aging thing and it's associated with old people, but it should be taken by everyone. Your
Yes.
fiber here is an interesting formula, mostly psyllium husk based on the 5.5 grams of that, but you have a whole blend with sunflower lecithin giving you a lot of phosphatidylcholine and some other stuff. Then you have omegas added here, and you have CLA and a digestive enzyme blend, as well as some probiotics. So you have it's not just fiber. This is a kind of a
No, it's
gut health
not.
supplement. Now
It's
you're
a, it's
taking.
a, go ahead.
I was going to ask. You're taking it a few times a day. You said it's unflavored, right?
It's unflavored, but it actually, it's a pleasant taste.
Really? Okay. I wasn't sure if
That's
you're
just
adding it to your proven egg or if you're doing anything.
no, I like just drinking. I'll just mix it in my water. Boom, I'll take it down. And it's got I guess because of the lecithin, I like that taste. It's got a nice taste to it.
Okay.
So it's nothing that's, bad, so I take it every day.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to try this one for sure. So I like what you're doing here, and you're kind of looking at more than what you've been doing, but you haven't let go of the roots, and so that's to me very important.
I mean, like I said, if we get into big box stores, we are looking at making egg in an RTD. I think I discussed it with you because I think
Hmm.
that's going to be big because it's just going to be another protein alternative. Um, but besides that, I still love the science and coming up with products to help with performance, to help with body fat, to help with longevity. All these things that are out in the market. I think it's one of the coolest things, and the research just keeps coming and coming and coming. So it's what I enjoy doing, and now that I'm at the helm and in control, I want to do it even more.
Now, yeah, from the entrepreneurial side and everything, are there any concerns of SKU creep or just having too many things, or how are you kind of looking at that?
Yeah. How the product sells. As long as the product sells, you have to be careful on how many SKUs you come up with. I have about 100 SKUs right now. We are cutting back on certain supplements that don't sell. I'm able to, experiment where I come up with something, you know, we talked about creatine HMB. I came up with already I've already had to produce it 3 times because it's sold out. So I'm like, shit, I think I have something here because it's selling out. But sometimes you do come up with products that don't move, and then you got to just slowly just get rid of them. And that's something I've been doing, for over, almost 3 decades. So I have the idea of what to do with that. But having the right inventory, having forecasts, working with your manufacturing. I mean, when you ask me about that, that's another difficult part of the business that you have to do because you can't have overstock because then you have all your money in inventory that you can't pay your bills, but you have to make sure you're not understocked because then you're losing sales. So it's a balance to be able to do that and see if your product is starting to sell more and more. Having several manufacturers instead of one, I think is an answer to that. And when I was stuck with partners, they were the manufacturers, so they wouldn't let me go to other manufacturers. Now I think it's important that you have that ability to use other manufacturers because it's hard to put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm trying to think. Like, yeah, you're hitting a lot of things there, so it's exciting to watch this. Distribution wise, you've mentioned a lot of retailers. Like, where are a lot of your sales coming from right now?
Believe it or not, I mean, we do a lot on Amazon. We're not in the chain stores. We got out of GNC when they went bankrupt, and I haven't gone back. And I heard they don't have their shit together. And I'm not going to go into GNC. I'm not that I wouldn't, but I'd make sure that it's on my terms. Going into GNC when I first started the business, GNC wanted the product. I signed a contract, and it was all on their terms. And you got to be real careful with that because there's stipulations in there where they can really take advantage of you overall with, chargebacks and credits and, all kinds of stuff that happens when you're dealing with these chain stores. We do have international sales. One of my biggest countries is Japan. I sell a lot of product to Japan. I just got into a pharmacy chain in the Middle East with the 5 GCC countries. I'm actually going to Dubai in February, so I'll be going there. So we're in South America, Mexico, um, Australia, New Zealand. So we're in, Philippines, Indonesia. So the brand, what's good about this brand that it was known internationally. So it still has a good international strength in sales, more than a lot of the newer brands that they don't know, because the brand just has a legacy name. So I was able to parlay that into better sales, but with better partners on the international side. Domestic side, we still deal with distributors. Um, we do sales on the website, but that's not like our strength. We use the website as a sounding board to get the sales out there and get people to know about the product. I don't know if you see lately, our social media has really gotten a lot better. I'm learning from that, and that's where you get young kids working in that part of the business. Our YouTube channel is growing, with the podcast that we're doing. We're signing up new subscribers every month, and it just continually grows. So a lot of what we want to do is grow the organic reach, but then also do the paid reach as well to, continually getting people knowing the brand.
Awesome. You mentioned Japan. Is there any specific reason why Japanese love you? Do
It's
you know?
we have an athlete called Hide Yamagishi,
Of course.
and
Yes.
he was our athlete, and we started selling to them my Anavite. Those guys alone buy 50, 60,000 bottles of Anavite. They just love Anavite. Um, it just worked out that, Saizon's another one. I've got different flavors of like Saizon that they buy specifically, for the Japanese market. We have one called Yuzu Lemon, which is a Japanese flavor that we sell, and they buy tens of thousands of bottles of it, in Japan. Um, I'm not sure why we're so big in Japan, but it's funny. I could go in the streets of Tokyo and they'll recognize me that I'm Rich Gaspari that sells products. So it's kind of cool. And I've been to Japan now. It's been, I think, about 8 or 9 times I've been to Japan. And I love Japan. It's a great country.
Hmm.
If you've ever been there, it's probably one of the best countries to go to.
Definitely on the list and everything. A more general question. So one thing that's obviously changed throughout the course of the time is that you no longer need like professional bodybuilders, competitive bodybuilders as your influencers to run or to support your brand. Now, how do you, as a professional bodybuilder who came out doing this, how does that make you feel? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
And it's just like you said, it's just a change in how things work. You want to find an influencer that's in good shape. The issue with the whole thing with the influencer program, it's hard because you try to find a good influencer, but he's already taken right away by another brand so quickly. I mean, you got top Olympia guys here, top 5, top 6, and you look at their social media and it's really poor. So he's not going to really help you in selling the brand. And then you can find a guy, an obscure guy he's got a good body and the guy's got, millions of followers that, he's never competed yet. This guy is, great. I mean, you got to see guys like Sam Sulek who now he's competing, but there's a guy that's so popular. And I respect him for the fact that, I mean, this kid went from obscurity and just putting out information. And he's got this huge following, and now he's competing. But yeah, it's just different that I don't hire pro bodybuilders that come to me and want these big contracts. If I hire anybody, and pay them, it has to be like, it's usually like a 3 month, 90 days to see what they can do and bring in me sales. If they don't bring me conversion, I just get rid of them. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about like different generations in this episode, which is kind of fun to talk about. But back in the day, it was easy for an IFBB pro to pull a 6-figure salary just based off of their IFBB pro card. But nowadays, most of the spectators watching bodybuilding might not be huge consumers. But if you work with YouTubers, TikTokers, creators, most of their following are people in the gym who will consume products. And so you much more easily can work with creators and understand that they're going to make conversion for you, especially if you're working with them like on a commissions basis. I'm sure Sam Sulek does very well with his coupon codes and would have no problem basing a relationship based off of that. And that's the kind of creator that you want to be working with. It's
I'd love to sign him. I try to sign him, but Raw took him. But because I mean, I like his attitude. I like the way when I started listening to him and I listened to his podcast, it's good what he comes out with. Even the Trend Twins, I looked at those guys and, first of all, I didn't respect they were called the Trend Twins. I'm like, what the fuck? These guys are promoting Trenbolone. But, they told me they didn't even know what Trenbolone was. They were just called, they thought they were on trend. So then I kind of had more respect for him overall. So, there's a lot of good influencers out there. I'm looking for that new kid. Maybe he's got 10,000 followers, but he's getting great conversion. And that's the next, Trend Twinners. He's the next Sam Sulek. That's the guys I look for. But right now it's all in numbers. I have guys that are, mini influencers, micro influencers, got 2,000 followers, 5,000 followers. Those are the guys I try to, bring into the company that put out posts. And, there's strength in numbers. If you can have 1,000 guys that have 5,000 followers, they're just as good as having one, great guy that's got 1 million followers. So that's kind of my attitude in what we're doing and picking the people that we use. And we just constantly look what they're doing. And if they're converting, if they're not, if they are, and I see the sales grow, then I, give them more incentive or I give them money, to grow. I mean, we talked about Hide Yamagishi. What happened with him is I saw his influence on Japan. He has a YouTube channel. I made a deal with him. I said, listen, I'll give you products with your name, and I did products like that where he gets, a certain amount of money per bottle he sells. And he's making more money now than he did, when he competed with me because now he's involved in the sales aspect and he's pushing those products that he's pushing in Japan because he's going to get those sales, by that Hide Yamagishi Saison with his name on it. He wants to sell that because he knows he's making money on every bottle sold.
Yeah, you can see the confidence in these small micro creators now. I mean, that's where the creator economy is going. Is like you said, if you can have 100 creators that have 5,000 followers, but they can create content, then that's way more valuable than having 20 with 1 million that you have to pay them 6 figures each just to get one measly post a month. Like, get people who maybe have some skin in the game. They need to be growing. They need to be working on it. I mean, a lot of these micro creators are going to be a lot more interested in actually working with you. Whereas these guys with 1 million followers, you're going to talk to them through their agent. You're going to get 1 post a month. You get 2 appearances a year, and they're barely working. I mean, there's a very different work ethic these days than there used to be. I remember when I was coming up hearing about, you, Rich, or like, Jay Cutler, like sitting at a table for 10 hours straight to talk to people. People go to shows to meet people. And nowadays you could just sit on YouTube or TikTok and sit on live and talk to people there. There's not a lot of work ethic left. So working with these smaller creators, they're hungry. They want to get after it. And typically they'll make better content. They'll connect with people better than working with, these huge famous people.
Totally agreed. Back in the day, when I had the pro bodybuilders, I actually would go on tour with them, go to Australia and spend like 2 weeks going from store to store to store and I would go with these guys. The one thing I did is, they still say it's unforgettable. I had Branch Warren or Flex Lewis or Hide, and we go and, for example, Branch, we were on a tour in Australia, New Zealand. Every day we would go to a different store and we'd work. But I also say, Branch, I'm going to make sure you're going to eat and I'm going to make sure you're going to train because I know those two things are important to you. But we're going to make sure you're going to work every day. We're going to go store to store to store to store, which we did. Which he says to this day, he says, I still enjoyed working with you, even though you worked the shit out of me. You made sure I ate, you make sure I trained. We went to New Zealand and he's a hunter. So he wanted to hunt this it's this deer. It's not even a deer. It's kind of an elk called a red stag. So his bucket list was fight. I set up a tour. I set up a hunting, and I don't hunt. I don't even know how to carry a gun. But I went with him to go hunt this red stag, and I was like the whole part of this trip. I was like, "You bust your ass for me. Let's go. I know you want to go hunting. Let's go hunting in New Zealand."
I grew up in Bridgewater Powerhouse in New Jersey, where Guy Cesternino always trained there. And I remember very vividly, anytime Flex Lewis was in town, he was with Gaspari, like if you were at the gym when he was there, you could say hi, you could say hello. Not while he was training. Obviously, we all knew rules around that. But like back then, people knew that you could walk up to bodybuilders, you could talk to them, you could train with them. And it was a different time. I think content has ruined a lot of that because they get so many comments and views that it makes them seem bigger than life. But I miss those days, man. Those tours, that was cool. It was cool to be able to feel like that. These bodybuilders came to areas to meet people that looked up to them.
I know it's lost, and that's part of the industry, like you said, that's lost, and now people go online and talk online or go live, and that's how they communicate with these people. So it is very different.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your podcast earlier. I was earlier on when we started talking again, I was going through it, and you get into some pretty aggressive stuff in there, like talking about anabolics, which of course has changed too over the course of time. Everyone's more open with things like TRT and what stacks they're on, as opposed to just hiding it like it was in the 2000s, even early 2010s and everything. So can you walk us through some of your favorite podcast episodes or some of the stuff that you like doing there?
I mean, when people asked me in one of the podcasts, I went into the drug cycles I took when I was, in the Mr. Olympia. And of course, people said, oh, you took more than that. I go into the, I took, the Parabolin and Primobolin and Deca dosages and exactly what I did and how I started my drug cycle and what I started on. And that got a lot of people watching it. A lot of people said, man, you were really honest. Some people were saying you lied. You probably took a lot more than that. And I was telling the truth of exactly what I took. I talk today still about TRT. I'm on TRT. I'm not going to lie that I'm not on TRT, but I have a doctor supervising everything I do with blood work. I keep my total test levels at 650. I'm not going to get it to 2000 because I don't want to have a friggin' stroke. I want to stay healthy. I like training. It makes me feel better. I'm on peptides. I'm on BPC 157. I'm on TB 500. I'm on MOTS-C. I'm in GHK-CU. I tout them because I know they work. I know they work. I mean, you see what's happening now. You see the FDA is going to actually take testosterone off the controlled list. I mean, very soon you're going to see now, because that's the biggest problem. You can't get testosterone, and a lot of doctors frown upon prescribing it, but taking it in the right dosages as you age, I think is one of the best things. And like I said, to this day, I believe in using it. I use the secretagogues as well to increase natural, GH levels. And I'm not, people are like, oh, I see you're on drugs. I'm like, I'm doing everything for longevity. I'm not taking stuff that I want to go back on stage, and I make sure my blood levels are all normal or optimum, because I'm not going to try to do anything to hurt myself or get myself. I don't know if you know this, I have a 6-year-old son. So in my 60s, I have a 6-year-old son. So I want to live long. Awesome. to raise him and be, have energy and, play football with him, even though I'm older.
That's kind of funny because we talk about like, what are you optimizing for? And when you're chasing Mr. Olympia, that's a completely different optimization than I want to be able to see my kid graduate high school or whatever it may be. So you're optimizing for a completely different thing, but there's still like similar things that are there. You still need a resistance train. One thing you mentioned way earlier, you have very strong legs. Like that's one of the biggest indicators for longevity because of the whole falling situation and everything. And like, we're not at that age yet, but that's the stuff that we need to talk about because at some point the leg strength is going to go down, and you want it to go down slowly because it's like not going to come back, and you want to be able to catch yourself when you're falling. Like that's the killer right there. So it's kind of cool, seeing how what we optimize for changes, but at the same time, like the bare basics are still there. It's like nutrition and resistance training and getting sunshine, all that good stuff, having a good outlook and all that, putting good people around you. And being with younger people definitely helps as well. So
I think it's great. I love being around younger people, in works, and learning like how they think, overall bringing younger people into my business actually helped, make me make decisions on how I'm going to run Gaspari Nutrition. And what I did 20 years ago and today are totally different. I mean, there's still, marketing that product and getting it out there. It may be a different way that you get it out there, but it just, like you said, being around young people, you learn from young people as well as, people learning from me, but I feel I have a lot of experience, overall in the industry. I'm still learning. Everybody can never, that's another thing, you got legacy brands that are out there and they don't want to change because what worked 20 years ago, they still think it works today and they end up not really being successful. Myself, I know that things have changed so much that what made me successful before is not going to work today. I still feel I'm a work in progress. Being with you guys is one of my things that I felt was important, to get the word out on overall on the brand, and just continually expanding upon, innovation, cool marketing, expansion overall in quality. I mean, these are all things that I believe in.
Yeah, I would say one of the powerful things that you've mentioned that I learned from you today is that you are paying attention to what is winning right now. I like that a lot. We speak to a lot of legacy companies that, just like you said, they were worth $100 million a generation ago, and they think that the same things are going to work for them, but it's not the same world anymore. There are still brick and mortars that you can work with well, but it's not the same day as when Europa and Lone Star were dominating. If you're going to work with GNC or Vitamin Shop, you have to understand the contract. You can't just walk in. The best thing that you have going on that you mentioned is the strong international. For a lot of legacy brands, international is a great opportunity because a lot of those countries, knew who you are and they can work with that. And then especially if you have overseas athletes. So I like hearing that you're paying attention to what's working right now and learning to work alongside that. I hear way too many legacy brands kind of, poo-pooing on the modern brands. They have figured out what works out now, and I think that's what's best for you guys is if you can adapt to that. So I'm really glad to hear that you're keeping up with the times. I think that's the only way that legacy brands
have to keep up with the times. Have deep respect for the new brands that are out there that 10 years ago didn't exist, and like, what are they doing? So I pay attention, and like you said, it's like legacy brands that I see that have not done anything to change what they're doing, and they're just, no, this is what works, and it doesn't, and you got to change. And when you make those changes, you see the results. And we're still a work in progress. Gaspari is slowly growing. Our sales, the past couple of years have definitely grown, but I still got a long way to go to where I want to be.
That's awesome. One thing I am absolutely so like over the moon with you is that you are back to 100% ownership or majority ownership, whatever it is, because that's one thing we don't see happen is once it starts slipping away, it gets sold to private equity or wherever, and then they just strip mine it and get every last bit of profit out of it, and you know exactly where it's going to end up. And it's like that's what we see a lot of legacy brands deteriorating and then disappearing, whereas you've kind of clawed your way back in. And I'm not sure how that all went down to get back to the vast majority of ownership. Yeah, okay, but great respect to you. So like when you have when you have the ownership, you have to do good again. So it's fun to watch this.
Yeah. No, and now I know the harder I work, the more successful I get. When I have other people telling me what I can do, you don't want to do anything to really push yourself. So you're only existing. So the brand just kind of survived. Now I want it to thrive. The point is thriving, growing this branding, coming up with ideas and people talking about the brand. That's what that's what I thrive on. And, for people to say, oh, he's done, that gives me more incentive to show people like I'm not done. As long as I'm, still alive and I'm still keeping myself, passionate what I believe in, I'm still here.
Definitely. You've been through a bunch of stuff and yeah, you are still here 100%. That's awesome. I don't have a whole lot of other things. I do encourage anyone listening to get some proven egg. I'll say it again.
Yeah.
I love this stuff. And then, yeah, your stack is looking really good over there. So I'm excited about the new stuff. And then I'm going to have to get my hands on some fiber. And I'm excited to try more of the proven egg flavors. It's kind of just a favorite thing of mine. Ben, do you have anything else here?
No, just a big thank you, Rich. I've been a long time fan. Just as a Jersey person, to see another bodybuilder in the space, where you went with it and seeing you come back with it is it's really cool. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, Rich, do you have any final comments? Otherwise, I'm not sure if you're going to get a perfect shaker with Gaspari Nutrition, but that's one of our sponsors. So there will be a gift out there for you here. So thank you to Perfect Shaker for that. But yeah, Rich, anything else you want to say to young entrepreneurs or any young bodybuilders, anything out there? Like, we'd love to hear it.
I mean, again, if you're a young entrepreneur, I mean, study the industry that you're going to get into. Everything takes step by step. You're building. It's like you're building. It's the birth of a baby that you're growing, and you have to nurture that baby. When you have a business, people start business, they think they can start taking money out of it. A lot of times, you may go years. With Gaspari, it was almost 3 years before I can even take any money out of the company to live off of it. So if you're starting a business, try to learn every aspect of the business. Get the right people on the team. When I tell people like I'm good at like face-to-face encounters with customers, I call myself a multiplier because I can, go to a customer and get my sales up. Some of the things I'm not good at is, it's important, but the accounting aspect of it, you got to know exactly, bottom line, your profit and loss statements, and it's very important. Every aspect of the business that you have to study, know the accounting, know the marketing, know things about how to create products. And you can't be good at everything. Pick up what you're really good at and get the right people that can help you with the other aspects that you're not that good at. And that's something that I've learned through, decades of working, and have loyal people that are going to work for you that are there to help grow the business, not just to grow themselves. And I had a lot of people work for me. Their main reason in coming on board with Gaspari was to help them grow in who they were and not necessarily grow the company.
Yeah, understood. And one thing you sadly have to tell people is you got to learn to fire fast sometimes. Like before we had Spencer with us, there was one guy that he lasted 10 days. And now I know that, hey, it's not going to work out. Let's cut ties, terminate, pay you out and everything, do the right thing. But you just got to know when it's not going to work out. And that's a tough lesson to learn. But once you've learned it, it's like you got to do the uncomfortable thing sometimes.
And have morals in what you do, believe in what you do. I mean, a lot of people get into, have ethics. When you get into this industry, you talked about a dark time with amino spiking and doing things that were not the right things to do because they cared about the bottom line and profits. Sometimes you have to have times to step back to say, I need to do what's right. And if you do that, you're going to be successful in the long term. Maybe in the short term, you'll get success from doing things by cheating. But in the end, I think it will bite you in the ass. And I feel today, it's like, I believe in, having my ethics. I believe in, doing things right, for people. Another thing is, I'm nice, but I've learned because I've gotten taken advantage of, don't take my niceness for weakness. So if something happens, I will, go into lawsuits. I will fight because I believe that if you show weakness, people will eat you alive.
And that there is the Dragon Slayer part of it, huh?
That is the Dragon Slayer.
Awesome. Well, Rich, thank you so much. I'm tapped out of questions. Very excited about this. Very excited to watch everything that you're going to be doing. And again, excited about the new products. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.